All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're tackling a massive paradox that's frankly keeping a lot of economists and probably a lot of you up at night. Because if you look at the United States economy right now, well, it looks absolutely fantastic on paper. But for so many people out there, it feels completely broken in reality. And that's because this entire system is being held up by 6 very specific and very fragile supports. Today, we're going to break down exactly what those are. Now, if you've been feeling a bit dizzy trying to make sense of the economy lately, you are absolutely not alone. Just look at the stark contrast we're living through. On one side, we've got what looks like a golden age, right? Stock market's hitting record highs, low unemployment, GDP is growing. But flip that exact same coin over, and we are seeing the textbook buildup of a major financial crisis. We're talking massive debt, unaffordable daily essentials, and just deep structural fragility. It's almost like looking at 2 completely different countries coexisting at the exact same time. So, to figure out how this is even possible, we really have to look at the invisible framework holding the whole thing together.
So let's get right into Pillar 1, the corporate and elite illusion. This is where we see exactly what's driving all that shiny headline growth.
What is truly staggering here is the sheer unprecedented scale of capital expenditure. I mean, imagine if an entire country's economy was being propped up by just one massive project from a handful of companies. That is essentially what's happening right now with 4 tech giants, Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, and Meta. They are funneling somewhere between $660 and $725 billion into capital expenditure, mostly AI infrastructure by 2026. To really put that into perspective, that is literally more money than the entire defense budgets of the UK, France, and Germany combined. We are watching the biggest infrastructure build-out in American history.
And here is why that matters so much to the broader economy. According to David Sachs, who serves as an AI advisor to Donald Trump, a staggering 75% of all US GDP growth in the first quarter of 2026 came entirely from this AI capital expenditure alone. Think about that. If you were to just strip out the spending of those 4 tech companies, the rest of the US economy is basically flatlining. It's a massive tightrope walk. Because if AI actually generates the revenue to justify all the spending, great. But if it doesn't, or what if it ends up cannibalizing the enterprise software firms that the financial system has already lent trillions of dollars to? Well, that shiny headline GDP number cracks instantly.
But here's the thing. Businesses can only buy so many GPUs, right? Eventually, real, everyday people need to spend money. So who is actually doing the spending? Well, imagine the US economy as one giant restaurant with 340 million potential customers. You'd probably expect a somewhat even spread of who's paying the bill. But recent data from the Fed and Moody's shows that the top 10% of US households are now responsible for nearly 50% of all consumer spending. The bottom 90%, they account for the other half. So half of the entire consumer economy is being driven by just 1 in 10 Americans. That is the highest concentration we have seen since 1989.
Which brings us nicely to our second structural support, the wealth effect. See, since 2020, the combined net worth of that top 10% has shot up by roughly $40 trillion, mostly driven by the stock market and housing prices. And because their investment portfolios look absolutely incredible right now, they feel richer. So they spend like that money is already in the bank. But the wealth effect is a serious double-edged sword. If we get a 20% correction in the stock market, which, by the way, historically happens every 4 to 5 years, all that paper wealth vanishes overnight. And considering consumer spending makes up 70% of total US GDP, if the top 10% suddenly close their wallets, this pillar completely collapses.
And that leads us straight into Pillar 2, the giant debt trap. To find our third and fourth supports, we need to shift our focus down to the everyday consumer. Let's look at a relatable persona. We'll call him Jack from Ohio. He's 32, married, a couple of kids, taking home about $5,200 a month. 5 years ago, that was totally fine. Today, reality has completely outpaced his paycheck. So what exactly is Jack, and frankly 90% of Americans in his position, doing just to survive right now? They're putting it on credit. This is our invisible third support. Right now, US credit card balances just hit an all-time record high of nearly $1.3 trillion. And on top of that, buy now, pay later has just exploded into a $100 billion industry, while subprime auto loans are absolutely soaring. And listen, this debt isn't funding luxury vacations to the Bahamas. It's funding groceries, it's funding gas, insurance, and rent. It's a giant pile of borrowed money holding up the bottom 90% of the consumer economy.
And this quote right here starkly highlights the real human reality behind those trillion-dollar metrics, because you just can't outrun rising prices with a credit card forever. Eventually, you hit a limit. Consumers are quite literally facing the choice between making their minimum debt payments and putting petrol in their tanks. Missed credit card payments, they're at a 13-year high. Over 40% of buy now, pay later users are missing their payments. And because of all this, consumer spending growth recently slowed down to just 1.6%. The everyday consumer is running out of duct tape to hold it together.
Now, if consumers are tapped out, who else is doing the spending? Well, the government. This is our fourth support pillar. The federal government has been injecting massive amounts of cash into the economy by operating on a multi-trillion-dollar deficit. It's kind of like having a family member who constantly boasts about their lavish lifestyle, only for you to find out they've been funding the whole thing on borrowed money for the last 15 years. Right now, the interest alone on the national debt is over $1 trillion a year. That means the government is shelling out $88 billion every single month just to service a massive $39 trillion mountain of debt.
And paying for that debt just got significantly harder. Back in February, the Supreme Court struck down the Trump-IEEPA tariffs in a 6-3 ruling. Now, those tariffs were the administration's single biggest revenue-raising tool. They got replaced with Section 122 tariffs, which are capped at 15% and expire in 150 days. The net result of this whole complex shift is that the new tariff regime brings in way less revenue for the government, while effectively acting as a $1,700 yearly tax increase on American households. That's the largest tax increase as a share of GDP we've seen since 1993. So the government is basically paying $3 billion a day just to stand perfectly still.
Which naturally brings us to a massive question and our final section here. Pillar 3, the macro glue. How exactly can a government owe $39 trillion, run trillion-dollar deficits year after year, and not face an immediate currency collapse? And this brilliantly illustrates our fifth pillar. It's what economists like to call exorbitant privilege. Because the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, almost all international trade, from oil shipments to microchips, is settled in dollars. It is literally the universal language of global finance. This creates a near-infinite global demand for dollars and US Treasury bonds, which allows the United States to print money and borrow at a scale that would instantly bankrupt any other nation on Earth. It essentially lets the US play by its own set of rules. But here's the catch. Over the last 20 years, as the US has heavily utilized the dollar in geopolitical sanctions, the rest of the world has been taking notes. We're now seeing these very methodical moves away from the dollar by BRICS nations and others. China and Saudi Arabia are settling oil trades in yuan. India is buying Russian oil in rupees. Iran and China are actively working on dollar-free trade networks. And sovereign central banks are buying up so much gold to diversify their reserves that they've pushed the price up 80% in just the last 2 years. Trust in the dollar isn't totally gone, for sure, but it is actively being chipped away. So, with all these cracks forming, why are investors just panicking? Well, that brings us to the sixth and final pillar, the political safety net. On Wall Street, they often call this the Fed put. Over the last 15 years, investors have essentially been trained to ignore real risk. They firmly believe that if the markets ever start to bleed badly enough, the government is always going to step in with an emergency package, a sudden rate cut, or some policy reversal to save the day. It's the psychological glue holding this whole system together. People don't sell because they just assume the cavalry will always show up.
Now, for years, these six supports, AI capex, the wealth effect, consumer credit, government deficits, the reserve currency, and the political safety net, have been slowly straining, but nothing had ever been big enough to test all six of them simultaneously. That is, until recently. Let's look at the climax, the February 28th shock. Let's rapidly step through the domino effect of what happened here. When major combat operations began between the US and Iran on February 28th, we saw a sudden, massive supply shock. Oil immediately shot up 45%. And that physical commodity crisis, it caused inflation to roar right back up to 3.5%. Suddenly, consumers were getting squeezed even tighter, government debt became way more precarious, and the realization hit the markets that a political safety net cannot print more oil or fix a physical supply shock. Every single one of those six pillars was hit at the exact same time. Now, so far, those supports have held, preventing an immediate collapse. But the longer they're strained under this kind of immense pressure, the bigger the eventual reckoning is going to be when one finally gives way. The US still has the deepest capital markets in the world and the reserve currency, which buys a whole lot of time, but it doesn't buy forever. Think about Britain.
They are currently 17 years into their own version of economic stagnation, resulting from a very similar trap. And the U.S. trajectory? It's looking remarkably familiar. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. What actually happens to the everyday consumer and to the global markets when the time bought by the reserve currency finally runs out? Thanks for joining me on this explainer today, and I'll catch you next time.